Being skilled in the art of communication is crucial to the success of any leader. He or she can accomplish nothing unless they can communicate effectively. Our next speaker is a skilled communicator who has spent over 30 years of a career helping organizations interpret their sustainability communications strategy. Today, more companies and their investors are recognizing sustainability as a strategic priority that involves significant business risks and opportunities. Moreover, organizations who demonstrate a high level of sustainability and trust outperform their industry peers. This is according to a recent report by Accenture. To throw more light on the same, we have Sudha Singh from the Purpose Room speaking on the importance of ESG in a purpose-driven world. Joining her on stage after her keynote will be Rammohan Regulapati, Head of Corporate Communications and Community Relations, Ultratech Cement. Sudha, over to you.
Thank you very much for the introductions. And thank you very much for that energizing performance. I think this was a big worry for me. After lunch, post-lunch, buffet lunch that too. And with that spread of desserts, how were we going to manage and have a room full of people who are awake? So thank you very much to SCORE students for livening up and waking us all up. It's brilliant to be young and alive, but also great to be middle-aged and alive in these times. So I'm going to use COVID as an excuse to not have everything extempore. I'm going to read most parts of my speech, and you'll have to forgive me for that. So we're talking about something that is very, very close to my heart. As you've seen, that I run a consultancy called the Purpose Room. It is not ironic that I'm speaking about purpose. It is definitely something that I believe in, and when I was setting up my consultancy, actually, the reason I named it the Purpose Room is because I was on a quest to find my own North Star. It was my second innings, so to speak. And I wanted to make sure that that innings was going to be purpose-driven. I won't say more purpose-driven, but purpose-driven. And I was doing things that I wanted to do and not doing things that somebody else wanted me to do. So it's very, very important for me to be able to believe in what I'm doing. And I believe that we all have a role to play in our society in how we contribute and what we contribute. So let me get started. Most, if not all of you must have heard the news in September this year that Patagonia's billionaire owner had decided to give away his company to fight climate crisis. He said that all of the company's profits would go towards saving the planet. Commenting on the move, Yvonne Chouinard said that instead of going public, they were going purpose and making Earth their only shareholder. But this is not a totally unexpected move from this 83-year-old billionaire who hates to be called a billionaire. Much before anybody had thought of the idea, they put 1% of their profits towards the planet. And in 2011, for a Black Friday sale, they released an ad asking consumers not to buy this jacket. Surprisingly or not surprisingly, sales went up, and in that year, they made over 30% of what they would have made in a normal year. And this was not cynical advertising. They were saying it because this product, the amount of water that it takes to create this product is what they were trying to educate the public about. Patagonia has made anti-consumerism core to the company's marketing strategy, and it has demonstrated that you can also make profit when you do good. Like Yvonne Chouinard said, purpose is not a strategy. Purpose is the why of business. In the past 2 years, purpose has become such a buzzword. It has also resulted in a lot of cynicism. Is this another marketing PR gimmick? Are we trying to ride a trend? Is it not the same as a company's mission statement? No, it categorically is not the mission statement. We often tend to conflate and confuse it for what the organization does, its products, its services, its customers. Organizational purpose is linked to a bigger why. Why does it exist? Why is the work that it does important for the community, for society, for the world? The purpose statement of an organization is definitely wider in scope than its business. It shouldn't be shrunk to just talking about its business. But purpose doesn't live just externally, outside an organization. It is embedded in its business operations, its culture, and its desire to contribute authentically to a bigger societal challenge. It rests in the heartbeat of the organization. And that purpose, just to make sure that all of you understand, that purpose is not written in stone. It is not something that you cannot amend. That purpose grows as the organization grows and its ambitions and aspirations in the wider world grow. A recent Accenture survey of nearly 30,000 consumers found that 62% of customers want companies to take a stand on current and broadly relevant issues like sustainability, transparency, or fair employment practices. The closer a company's purpose aligns to their own beliefs, the better. But remember, not to fake it, to force fit it to a marketing gimmick. You're likely to be called out sooner rather than later. Does it mean that business should sacrifice profit at the altar of purpose? Categorically, no. It is imperative that businesses continue to make profits in order to be sustainable, but it is also important that they make a difference. According to a global leadership forecast from 2019, there are 3 types of organizations: those with a purpose, those without a purpose, those with a purpose statement, and purposeful organizations where leaders bring the stated purpose to life through their behaviors and actions. There's clear evidence that companies in the 3rd category were earning a significant performance premium. They outperformed the average by 42%. They have significantly stronger culture, better retention, more loyalty, innovation, even resilience, which is critical during times of crisis. All in all, it's a win-win for all stakeholders. Milton Friedman wrote that the social responsibility of a business is to increase its profits. Half a century later, there is a realization that the single-minded focus on shareholders has not been great for society or the world at large. And so we must put that behind us and lay it to rest. And business leaders, rightfully so, recognized the threat in 2019 at the Business Roundtable and released a corporate purpose statement which emphasized responsibility to shareholders for the first time ever, as well as other stakeholders. But how many of those signatories from the Business Roundtable have put their words to action? I'm not going to tell you that number. I think you can go back home and do the research. Unfortunately, not many. There are very few of them who've done that. So great brands, great companies, great leaders are based on what they think, what they do, and what they say. When all of these 3 pillars work together and align, people look up. That is where the purpose opportunity is. So the pandemic, the urgency around climate action failure, extreme weather, misinformation, disinformation, social movements for racial, caste, and gender equality, extreme polarization, the changing demography of our workforces, employee activism, increased customer expectation, the interconnected nature of our lives, technological advancements mean that we are living in times of great and continuous change, and not all of it is positive. All of this is compounded by the reality that the world is changing. BRIC countries are beginning to gain ground. BRIC countries are beginning to gain clout and are starting to flex their muscles. They're collaborating to push back on Western narratives on sustainability, sustainable development, climate change, net zero, and other strategic priorities. It is also a time when trust in public institutions, governments, judiciary, media, politicians, businesses has been on a sharp decline. And there's plenty out there to build that distrust. And often our fraternity has been complicit and front and center of these activities that built distrust. But we are not to be blamed for everything. While inequalities were exacerbated during the pandemic, the poor got poorer, and the world's top 10 richest men more than doubled their fortunes from 700 billion to 1.5 trillion. And the top 10 tech companies made record profits. At the world's 7 biggest oil firms, profits soared at almost 150 billion this year, while the cost of energy is so high that in a developed country like the UK, people are having to choose either to heat their homes or to eat this winter. And this is not just rhetoric, this is the reality. People are struggling. If we focus on climate change imperatives, just yesterday I read an article in The Guardian that more than 20,000 people died across Western Europe in this summer's heat waves. This summer's heat wave temperatures exceeded 40 degrees in London, a city that is not designed for the heat. We were all sweltering in the heat. The homes are not air-conditioned, and they're designed to be warm rather than to be cool. So the infrastructure is just not there, not geared for it. There's 42 degrees in Seville, and parts of Spain recorded 44 degrees. In the Indian capital region, it was over 49 degrees this summer. I had forgotten how hot it can get there. If we look at India, it is one of the global hotspots identified by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, in terms of geographical and socio-economic vulnerabilities. The Global Risk Report ranks India at 177, one of the world's worst performing nations on environmental health, protecting ecosystems, and mitigating climate change. As a rapidly growing economy, India's energy demands and emissions are projected to double, if not triple, by 2050. While per capita emissions are low at present, India is already the third largest single country emitter of greenhouse gases and has the second largest population in the world at over 1.3 billion. Next year, we are slated to take over from China. Our cities are rapidly urbanizing. By 2030, 50% of Indians will be living in cities and bearing the brunt of climate crisis. And we still have decades of development and infrastructure ahead of us. So what are the options available to us? It all sounds rather grim, but this is the reality. We will need 50% more energy, 35% more food, 40% more water by 2050. And by the way, by 2050, the oceans will most likely have more plastic than fish. This is a wake-up call for everyone, including comms professionals. All of the above are identified future risks for business. As BlackRock CEO Larry Fink said in his famous letter to CEOs, climate change has become a defining factor in companies' long-term prospects. There is no work around it. We cannot pretend all of this is not impacting us already, and it won't in the future. We need transformational ways to reimagine the relationship between business and the environment, business and its stakeholders, business and shareholders, and redefine roles and responsibilities in the interests of a better world. We need to start building towards a just transition for everyone, not just for a few. So let's take a moment to pause and imagine the future at the pace we are progressing today. I believe my generation, and I speak for myself, I can't speak for everybody, has been passive observers while our earth has been destroyed. We've been very focused on material things and our individualistic interests. But is this the future that we want our children and their children to inherit? I know that I certainly don't want my children to inherit this sort of world. I'm not sure how many of you know, but 2020 to 2030 is also called as the decade of reporting, and it is called as the age of action. Why? Because there's less than 10 years for us to achieve our SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. What happens if we do not achieve the SDGs? It means further deepening of financial, economic, social, and digital divide. For India to continue on its growth trajectory and become a $5 trillion economy, inclusive and sustainable growth is a must if it is to be a reality and not a mirage. So where does ESG come into it? The BlackRock CEO has set the tone for it. So is ESG an overnight sensation? Is it a flash in the pan? Did it spring to life suddenly in the last couple of years? Actually, no. It has been around for some time in some form or the other. I won't go back too far in history. In the 1920s, it was called socially responsible investing, which was rooted in religion and religious texts. And it was generally exclusionary, alcohol, tobacco. And then we had the 30s, where it was responsible investing because people were not certain about the socially and what it meant. There were also governance issues, so the focus was on governance during the Great Depression. In the 1990s, it was sustainable investing, and the word sustainability was introduced in the 1990s. It introduced an awareness of climate and climate changes. In 2000, it was ESG investing. In 2006, the UN launched the PRI, which requires incorporation of ESG issues into the investment process. As you can see, the percentage of CEOs naming ESG as one of their priorities has doubled from 2020 to 2021. This is a result of the mounting pressure that leaders face both internally and externally to build a fairer and more inclusive workplaces, engage with stakeholder concerns, practice governance in managing their fiduciary responsibilities, and contribute to a higher purpose. Are these just the drivers? No, there are many other drivers. ESG assets are on track to exceed 50 trillion by 2025, more than a third of the projected assets. Institutional investors in Europe expect ESG and non-ESG products to converge, and 77% of these institutions expect to stop buying the latter, and that is sooner rather than later. Investment priorities are changing. 95% of millennials in a recent report are interested in sustainable investing, and 45% would be motivated to increase their contribution if their pension incorporated responsible investment values. It is not all about optics. ESG parameters is great for risk identification also, including those for failing business models. I think our comms professionals are very aware of what kind of risks are there, the reputation risks. Between 2005 to 2015, 17 companies went bankrupt, and 15 of these companies that went bankrupt had very poor ESG scores related to governance, cybersecurity, environmental issues, leading to almost 534 billion worth of losses. As one report said, intensifying the focus on ESG in business community isn't another trend to superficially improve share price or brand perception. It is a movement that is strongly linked to better financial performance, employee retention, and risk management. ESG has moved from the nice to have to a business imperative at an incredible speed. An ESG strategy, what is it? It's a prism. ESG is not a fund. It's a prism through which different parts of businesses view their roles and make their decision. It is about using data to show how business is managing environmental and social risks while demonstrating responsible business practices and delivering positive impact. Essentially, ESG is stewardship. So we're quite strong on the G part of it, on the governance part of it, because financial reporting has been around for long. And we're also fairly strong on the E part of it. The S part of it is where most organizations are floundering. And in the G part, there are newer elements that have been added. And even in the E part, there are newer elements that have been added that people are essentially struggling with. We should be prepared for this as a fraternity, because sooner rather than later, it'll be mandatory. There are increasing calls to integrating ESG reporting with mainstream financial reporting. As an industry, are we ready to support our clients on that journey? Do we have the skills, the mindset, and the curiosity required to keep abreast with a rapid pace of change? The pandemic has been, I think, positive in some ways for the PR industry. It has given PR and comms professionals a seat at the table. We are all aware that no other function in an organization has that breadth and depth of understanding of a business like we do. We also bring a wider perspective from the external audiences, challenges, and drivers. While organizations across the world grapple with making sense of the standards and frameworks, we have a unique opportunity to help an organization to support their change program, help define the narrative, tell its story authentically, and engage with all its shareholders and stakeholders. Sustainability or ESG communications so far has been a tick box exercise for most organizations. However, the expectations from today's stakeholders is that companies move beyond compliance. This is what we've been doing so far, to actually articulating clearly and concisely how they are addressing big societal challenges, right from human rights concerns, DEI, net zero, waste management, etc. With declining trust in business and governments in today's world, transparency is an imperative. There's an increasing demand for action over words, and taking a lead in communicating with your stakeholders is not just nice to have, but a necessity. The challenge to surmount distrust exists because traditionally PRs and agencies have also been complicit in greenwashing. A recent research says that greenwashing is the biggest concern for 44% of ESG investors. I don't know how many of you know, but if you make it a habit to read sustainability reports and ESG reports, you will notice that there is a lot of similarities in the reports that are being written. There's something called stock sustainability. So 90% or more than that companies use the same phrases to talk about their sustainability initiatives. Same words, same phrases. So if you remove the branding or if you remove the logo and replace it with another, you could easily do it, because you have not developed a narrative. You are just following the rest and trying to jump on the bandwagon. That is greenwashing, by the way. That is not sustainability. There's also another term that you must look up, and it is called being a watermelon organization. So green on the outside and red on the inside. So all vague sort of sustainability statements on the top. But if you drill down and you see whether it's the human rights practices, labor laws, all of that is not being followed. So how do you tell a story? We have an opportunity to define the narrative for organizations and tell their story to all their stakeholders on how sustainability is embedded in their business. The first step is to get leadership commitment and define that commitment, and define the resources and the money being put towards that commitment. This strategy allows you to showcase your sustainability credentials to your customers, employees, shareholders, investors, community. What steps have you taken or are taking to fulfill your commitment? How are the communities benefiting? What is the impact on the environment? This is both for internal and external. How do you enable governance on your board? I talk a lot about women in leadership and DEI, and unfortunately, I every time I look up a company, I first go and look at the board composition. And most companies in India still have male boards. I can't say white, that is Europe, UK and US, but they're male boards, and there is that, that one token woman director because of the regulatory requirement who is there. But this is not going to, people are going to call you out at some point for if you start speaking about sustainability, if you speak about human rights, if you speak about inclusion, and your board is not inclusive, if you're not paying your CEOs the salary and you're not transparent about that salary, you're going to get called out. I recently spoke to a group of leaders from NASSCOM in Bangalore, and I was telling them that if you look at the top 10 leaders in any organization, and you look at the salary discrepancy between the men and women, first of all, women comprise only 2% of that top 10 highest paid in any organization. And from that 2%, if you look at their salaries and compare it, there is at least between a 35 to 40% minimum variable between the salaries. So, you can't, that is called greenwashing. When you're talking about sustainability, but you have no transparency and you are not really bought into what the story that you're trying to sell. I won't take much more time. So sustainability communications is, of course, why we're talking all about it, because it's the key factor assessed by investors against a company's long-term health and financial performance metrics. Showcasing how you drive business value is a key component of ESG. The value of ESG metrics extends far beyond attracting investors. It's a powerful way, as I said earlier, to connect to your customers, build partnerships, retain employees, and win that war for talent that all organizations have. Also notable that those companies that are choosing an ESG communications framework over the traditional, narrower corporate social responsibility framework, the role of PR professionals is more important over them. Our time is now, people, time to be strategic, time to be the strategic counsel and steer our clients towards, the stories that they need to tell and they must tell, so that we are all able to move towards a better future because we are all speaking authentically. And I think PR needs to move beyond this thing about PR being spin, because everywhere I think that narrative exists. In spite of us having made so much progress, in spite of us doing so many important playing so many strategic, key, critical roles within an organization, we've not been able to frame our narrative. But this is an opportunity for us to reframe how we are seen and to reframe how our clients are seen in the wider world. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Sudha. That was really insightful. Shall I help you?
I can take it afterwards.
Yeah, so I particularly like the framework that you presented of making purpose central to, by linking profit to planet and people. This topic itself of purpose and ESG is very fertile. There are many questions that come to mind, but we have time only for a couple of questions. So what I'll do is I'll start with a question, hand it over to the audience. Yeah, the one that from the narrative that you spoke about, one of the things that comes about is the primacy that's coming to ESG from access to capital. And we see a lot of companies, the ESG narrative moving towards how to leverage that opportunity. From that perspective, what do you see are the challenges for us as PR professionals, as comms professionals, and what's our mandate with the clients that we serve or the companies that we work, particularly in terms of addressing the challenge of greenwashing?
Yeah, so I think, hello? this is working, right? So I think this is a huge opportunity for PR professionals, so ESG is something that the big consulting firms are advising clients on, but I don't see any reason why PR professionals and comms professionals cannot upskill and get into that role. From a point of attracting capital, I think that's sort of, that is the story that a lot of people are trying to sell to their leadership, because it seems to be like a quick win. I would say that, if you go into this journey with the mindset that it's going to help me attract capital, and that is my single story, then I don't think that's going to work. So how in earlier times when private equity firms or investors were looking at a company, they would put 5 researchers to do all that work and do the drudgery and actually physically look for information. In today's world, that is not happening. Individuals are not doing it. So AI is scraping that data. AI is already biased and AI has its limitation. So the data that it is scraping is from the available information that is, either your media stuff or your sustainability report. And if you have put information about, the great work that you're doing towards net zero or, greenhouse gas emissions or on human rights, if it is not in a place that is, visible, it is going to probably get lost. So, those companies, the investors that are looking for that, are not going to be able to find that information. Also, when investors look at, so you want to attract capital, but when investors are looking to put in capital, they're not just looking at, one part of it. They're looking at the whole picture. Where are you on the environment? What is your commitment? What is your commitment on governance? I think the first thing that anybody does now is look at the board composition. I often call out companies on their boards on the way that they are. I try not to call them out on social media. I, try to send them a private message and ask them. But, I've noticed that when you send them a private message, they tend not to react too much. And that could be a challenge. So I'd say that we have a huge opportunity, but it requires us to upskill. It requires us to learn. It requires, as an industry, for us to create, create that space where, people can learn and grow. Because I think PR and comms on its own, after a certain point, with the way we talk about it, can get boring. And this is something that everybody is interested in. We all want to do purpose-led work. We all are interested in, using our intelligence and our abilities. We don't want to be restricted to just sending out a press release. So it's an opportunity for us. I would say for corporates that are trying to just, make it a story about one single story, about one strand. It's great for getting capital. I don't think that works. Your effort internally will stagnate after a point in time.
Anybody has a question? Yeah, please, the mic there. We have time for 2 questions.
Thank you. I'm Bharani from Reliance.
Little loudly.
Yeah, I'm Bharani from Reliance. So in the food industry, typically we have the FSSI or the ISI mark, which is the mark of quality. You look at it and you know that the product conforms to certain norms. In the ESG space, are there marks or standards that can communicate whether the company abides by the ESG regulations? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge. Huh? There are too many standards and frameworks. The GRI, SASB, the WEF has come up with its own. India has its own, huge laundry list of things that they want companies to report on, the top 1,000 to report on from next year. So they exist. But my recommendation would be that, don't jump on the bandwagon. All companies don't have to report on everything. All companies do not have to, attempt to do each of the line items under ESG. You have to look at your materiality and you have to look at your risk issues, and then you have to prioritize on what within that ESG and where they sit within the ESG and do, and then frame yourself. And of course, as an industry, we are so used to scanning, competition, so used to thinking about how external audiences, etc., are behaving, that this shouldn't be a problem for us. So there are standards, and there is an attempt to reframe again some news so that there'll be a single standard across the globe that organizations can follow. And Europe, of course, is far ahead of the curve when it comes to setting standards, etc. So there is no one single standard. I think companies need to see what works for them based on their materiality risks, materiality assessment, and then define, what are the areas they're going to work on.
Yeah, we have time for one more question. Yeah, please.
Hi, Crystal here again. So we were talking about like these big companies, kind of setting their ESG goals, right, and stuff like that. But coming to startups, how important is it for them to, apply these ESG goals while planning? I don't know.
So like I said, ESG it's a process of ascertaining your impact on the world through your environmental, social, and governance on some bigger societal issues. For startups, I think it is very important, but unfortunately, I've seen this across UK, Europe, and in India, that I have been trying, that I've been meeting startups. Some startups, I've met a couple of unicorns who are like really bought into the idea, but they are unicorns. But if you look at the early stage ones, they say they need to get to a certain stage because that's what their investors or their founders believe they need to do. And then they are going to start acting. But by then it's already too late because, they've already, sort of set some things in motion, example, behaviors, how they want to be seen as an organization or how they want to behave as a company. And I think those things are hard to walk back from. My advice for startups would be to actually embed all of this right at the start because it's much, much easier. You're not having to reinvent the wheel like a big organization needs to do, right? For a big organization, it's about systems, processes, it's about huge change. And it is actually, if you're talking about real impact, it means that they need to take actions in order to, achieve that change. For startups who are early in their journey, most of them are not interested in it. They say it is because of investor priorities, but my sense is that more and more investors are going to be asking them to be doing it. But let's see. I haven't noticed a huge shift in India at this stage.
Yeah, I'm tempted to slip one in myself. I hope Sarika is forgiving. One last question. We have a lot of youngsters here. When people of my age entered the profession, the narrative was on shareholder capitalism. Today, and you alluded to that, it's about stakeholder capitalism. So clearly the skills that are required in both these contexts are different. What are those 2 or 3 things that you would like the younger colleagues among us to focus on as we embrace stakeholder capitalism and drive the narratives around that?
I think, our comms professionals, I think it's such a underrated industry, such underrated talent within the industry. And they do so much of brilliant work all the time without being appreciated. Maybe their bosses appreciate them, etc. But the wider world, I'd say, your job is to just be on the background and do those great things and make these companies not be in the news. So I think that talent exists. The reason why we were focused on shareholder capitalism was because that's what the companies wanted us to do. Stakeholder capitalism means that you are looking at stakeholder engagement in a bigger way. It's an opportunity for all of them to actually flex and use the skills that they already have, to build relationships, to understand, to listen, and to not actually, one of the things that I've noticed, we pay too much attention to social media listening, which is great. But most of the world doesn't live on social media. Most of the world still lives outside of social media. So it's important for you to listen to voices on the ground and to hear the actual, communities and stakeholders speak about what they say. I believe that this generation has more empathy than previous generations. And I think they need the curiosity. I often hear that, they have different work ethics. And I'm very glad that they have different work ethics, because it means that they don't work 24/7, that they have priorities other than work, and they have an identity beyond work. Because all of those identities actually help shape how you behave as a communicator. And I think your relationships, your work, just be curious and flex yourself. I think this is a huge opportunity for us as an industry.
That's a very strong message to end on. Thank you, Sudha, once again for a wonderful, insightful session.